I want you to just for a second imagine the sheer statistical impossibility of what we're about to discuss today.
It really is staggering when you break it down.
We're talking about a specific Tuesday, September 19th, 1991. We are at 3,200 meters. That's what, over 10,000 feet up?
Way up there, in the Ötztal Alps, right on that razor's edge border between Austria and Italy.
And this is a place where the air is thin, the wind is just merciless, and the landscape is, for the most part, a completely blank canvas of white.
It's the death zone for all intents and purposes, or, at least a zone where life isn't meant to linger for very long.
Right.
Survival up there is a constant minute-by-minute negotiation with the elements.
And usually the mountains, they keep their secrets. They're very good at it. But the source material for this dive points to this really specific weather anomaly that year.
The Sahara winds.
Exactly. These winds had blown this layer of dust all the way from Africa, and it settled on the ice.
And that dust, because it's dark, it absorbed the sun's heat instead of reflecting it like the white ice normally would.
Which massively accelerated the melt.
Yeah.
In a way that hadn't happened for centuries, maybe millennia.
A total fluke, a perfect storm of conditions. If that dust hadn't settled, or if the two hikers we're about to meet had walked, say, 10 meters to the left or right,
we wouldn't be having this conversation.
We would know almost nothing about the day-to-day life of the Copper Age. Our understanding would be entirely theoretical, based on pottery shards and, well, dust.
Instead, because of this perfect storm of coincidences, we didn't just find a skeleton.
No, we found a wet mummy.
A wet mummy. That is a grotesque but really important distinction, isn't it?
It is.
I think when most people hear the word mummy, their minds immediately go to Egypt. They think of wrappings, chemicals, things that are as dry as a bone.
Precisely. Egyptian mummies are desiccated. They are intentionally dried out through a very specific process. This man, he was freeze-dried by nature and then encased in a glacial tomb.
So everything was still there.
Everything. His internal organs, his eyeballs, the actual contents of his last meal in his stomach. It was all there, hydrated, preserved by the ice. This wasn't a soldier from 1945. This wasn't a lost hiker from the 80s.
Though that is exactly what everyone thought he was at first.
They did, for quite a while, actually. But they were standing over a man who had been dead since before the first stone was laid at Stonehenge.
They called him Ötzi the Iceman. And his story is, frankly, about to blow your mind. The mission for this deep dive is to unpack how a pleasant afternoon stroll turned into one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in history.
And it wasn't just a simple discovery.
No, we aren't just looking at the triumph of finding him. We are going to look at the comedy of errors that almost destroyed the body entirely.
A comedy of errors is a very polite way of putting it.
It is. And we'll look at the incredible technology he was carrying and the cold case murder mystery that took over 5,000 years to even begin to solve.
And that story of near destruction really underscores how fragile history is. It's a miracle we have him. But before we get to the botched rescue, we have to start with the people on the ground.
Helmut and Erika Simon.
The discoverers.
Right. The protagonists of this whole story. Now, reading through the reports, Helmut and Erika, they weren't just some random tourists who got lost in the woods.
No, and that's a key detail. They were from Nuremberg, Germany, and they were very experienced mountaineers.
So they knew what they were doing.
Oh, absolutely. These sources describe them as the kind of people who deeply respected the mountains, but also sort of laughed at danger. They viewed a 10,000-foot ascent not as some grueling life-or-death expedition, but as a casual day out.
A pleasant afternoon stroll.
Yeah.
I love that mindset, but at the same time, it terrifies me.
It speaks to their competence, their confidence in that environment. They were in the South Tyrol region, specifically navigating the Teisenjoch Pass. They knew the terrain.
But on this specific Tuesday, September 19th, 1991, they made a micro decision. A tiny choice.
The shortcut.
The shortcut.
Exactly. They decided to leave the marked trail and navigate through a rocky gully. It wasn't a reckless move, not for them. It was a decision born of convenience, maybe to save a little time or avoid some slushy, difficult ice.
But that one small decision, just stepping off the main path and into that gully,
changed history. Completely and utterly.
So they're picking their way through the rocks, the melting ice. It's just the two of them up there. And then Erika sees something.
She spots it first. A dark shape, kind of brownish, protruding from the ice and the slush.
Okay, so put yourself in her boots for a second. You're at that altitude. Your brain is trying to categorize things really, really quickly just to make sense of the environment.
Yeah.
Is it a rock? Is it trash?
My first thought would be a discarded jacket. Or a backpack. People leave gear behind all the time, unfortunately.
That was their initial thought, too. Debris. Garbage. But the atmosphere was eerie. The sources mention the wind howling through the pass, that kind of ancient, deep silence you only get in the high mountains. And Erica just felt that something was wrong.
It didn't look right.
It didn't look like fabric, it looked organic.
So she calls out, "Helmet, come look at this." Her voice cracking a bit in the thin air. They're about 60 meters, so maybe 200 feet, from the main trail, in this natural basin that had been carved out by meltwater.
And as they got closer, the shape resolved itself. It wasn't a jacket, it wasn't a rock, it was the back of a human head and shoulders.
Yeah, Helmet described his blood running cold. And honestly, I completely get it. Seeing a body is traumatic enough, but seeing one in that specific environment must be purely visceral.
It's the positioning that really strikes me, and it's so crucial for understanding the initial confusion that follows. The body was prone, face down in the meltwater.
Face down, okay.
The left arm was twisted bizarrely beneath the torso, but the right arm was outstretched.
Reaching for something that would never come. I have to say that one line in the source material really stuck with me.
It's powerful. It strips away all the history and archaeology for a moment, and you just see the human struggle. This was someone who fell or lay down and simply never got up again. But the thing is, initially, the Simons didn't see ancient history. They just saw a tragedy.
A modern tragedy.
They assumed it was a mountaineer, maybe someone who got lost a few years back and was just now being revealed by the melting ice.
That was the only logical assumption. I mean, the Alps claim lives every single year. Glaciers move, they churn things up. Finding a body from the 1970s or 80s happens. It's sad, but it's not unheard of.
But then the cognitive dissonance starts to set in. They're standing there, the wind is whipping around them, and they're looking at this hiker. But the gear is all wrong.
Completely wrong. If you find a hiker from 1980, you expect to see nylon. You expect bright colors, reds, blues, yellows. You expect zippers, plastic buckles.
Gore-Tex.
Gore-Tex, exactly. Even a soldier from World War II would have, canvas, rubber boots, metal buckles, something recognizable from the 20th century.
But this man, this body, he was wearing fur.
Fur and leather. The whole appearance was just primitive. That's the word they used. The Simons had seen documentaries about Inca mummies. They'd seen ancient remains in museums. And slowly, standing there in the freezing wind, it started to dawn on them.
This doesn't look like a hiker from Munich.
This looks like something else. Something impossibly old.
But they still had to document it. And this is 1991, so there are no iPhones, no geotagging your photos.
No Instagram stories, no.
Helmut pulls out a film camera.
He did, and thank goodness he did. He used the very last photo on his roll of film to take a picture of the body.
Just one picture.
Just one. He documented the scene with this sort of methodical precision, almost as if he was trying to convince himself that what he was seeing was actually real.
I can imagine. Because you have to think about the next step.
Wow.
You can't just go back down the mountain and say, hey, we found a caveman.
Nobody would believe you. You need proof.
So they take the photo. They have this profound moment of awe and, I imagine, horror. And then they do what responsible citizens do. They go to report it.
And this is where the story shifts. It goes from a historic discovery into what the outline so perfectly calls the comedy of errors.
It really was.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's a miracle we have the body at all after what happened next.
You have to put yourself in their shoes. To the Simons, this is an earth-shattering, once-in-a-lifetime discovery. But to the rest of the world at that specific moment, it was just a bureaucratic hassle.
Right. So they hike down to the nearest mountain hut, the Similon hut, and they find the keeper, a man named Marcus Pierpemer.
And Marcus is a practical man. He lives up there. He's heard every tall tale imaginable from exhausted hikers. He's seen it all. He's used to the tragic reality of the mountains.
People die in the Alps. It happens. It's part of the job.
So the Simons run in, probably out of breath, frantic, saying, "There's a body up in the pass. It looks ancient." And Marcus is probably just thinking, okay, yeah, another one.
He's not thinking archaeology. He's thinking paperwork.
Exactly. He initially dismissed it as just another unfortunate climber. His skepticism is completely understandable. You don't wake up in the morning expecting the Copper Age to literally drop on your doorstep.
But they must have been persuasive.
They insisted on the primitive nature of the clothing and the gear. So, intrigued despite himself, Pierpemer does his duty. He contacts the police in the nearby Austrian town of Solden.
And this is where we start to play the game of telephone. I find this part so frustrating to read about.
Information degradation is a fascinating and, in this case, terrifying phenomenon. The Simons have this detailed visual. Primitive clothing, leather, fur, an ancient-looking axe. But as that message gets relayed from the hut keeper to the police station through the radio dispatch, all that crucial nuance just evaporates.
So by the time it hits the official log, ancient body and primitive clothing?
Becomes hiker discovered near Similon.
Oh, no.
Just a routine body recovery, no scientific emergency, no call to the university's archaeology department, just go get the body.
Now, this is the part of the research that honestly gave me anxiety.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
You'd assume, given that we have a body partially frozen in ice, the authorities would, at the very least, seal off the area.
Yeah.
You'd expect a CSI-level response, right?
You would expect that today. But remember, the initial call was just dead mountaineer. So the Austrians, who at this point thought the body was on their side of the border, sent up a standard recovery team.
And standard in the high Alps implies speed, not delicacy.
Not at all. We're talking about getting a body off the mountain before the weather turns. That's the priority.
The sources describe a scene that sounds less like an archaeological dig and more like a construction site.
It was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. The team that went up on September 20th consisted of mountain police and a local undertaker. They aren't thinking archaeology, they are thinking extraction.
And the ice is hard.
The ice is as hard as concrete. So what do? They start hacking at it.
With ice picks.
With pneumatic drills and ice picks.
You cannot be serious. Pneumatic drills.
There is a terrifying account in the police log where the undertaker is actually pulling on the body's clothes, which we now know are 5,300-year-old priceless artifacts, and they are tearing. They are ripping the fur to try and free the frozen limbs.
Oh my God. And it gets worse, doesn't it? I read about this stick.
Ugh, the stick, yes. They couldn't get the body free from the meltwater, which was refreezing around his legs and hips. So one of the recovery team members looked around, grabbed a nearby stick, and started using it as a lever to pry the torso out of the ice.
A nearby stick. Let me guess.
It wasn't a stick, it was one of the artifacts. They were using the man's own unstrung yew longbow, a technological marvel of the Copper Age, as a crowbar.
We broke it, didn't they?
They snapped the tip of the bow, they damaged the hip of the body with the drills, leaving a huge gash. They were essentially destroying the crime scene to clean it up.
It's unbelievable. It really frames the fragility of history. We were one over-enthusiastic swing of a pickaxe away from decapitating the most important archaeological find of the century.
We really were. And it wasn't just him. They were trampling all over the site, kicking other artifacts around, completely oblivious. It wasn't until late in the day on the 20th, with the sun, as one source puts it, bleeding gold across the glacier, that they finally paused long enough to actually look at what they were hacking at.
That's the moment of realization. The penny drop.
I think it was the axe. You can mistake a lot of things in the ice, but you can't mistake a polished copper blade lashed to a yew wood handle for a modern hiking pole. That was the moment the mood on the mountain shifted from routine recovery to, uh-oh, what have we found?
Okay, so they finally realized this is something extraordinary. Let's dive into that. Let's do the inventory of the Iceman, because this is where the detective story really begins. The body is the star, obviously, but the stuff he was carrying with him, that's what tells us who this man actually was.
It's a perfect time capsule. Everything he needed to survive was laid out in the ice around him or in his pouches. Let's start with the most defining object, the one that finally made them stop drilling.
The copper axe.
Yeah.
So why is this such a big deal? I mean, it's an axe. People have had axes for a very long time.
It's the material. Up until this point, there was a lot of academic debate about the timeline of the Copper Age, especially in this specific remote alpine region. Finding a nearly pure copper blade, perfectly preserved with its yew wood handle and the leather binding still intact. It was definitive proof.
So it was like finding a missing page from the history books.
Exactly. But even more than that, it tells us about his social standing.
Right, because copper was expensive, like really expensive.
It was high technology, it was incredibly rare and difficult to produce, it had to be mined, smelted from ore, cast into a specific shape. To carry an axe like that meant you were someone of importance. You weren't just a shepherd or a peasant, you had status.
So it was a tool, but it was also a weapon and a symbol of power.
All three. It was a multi-tool of the ancient world.
So he was a VIP, a very important prehistoric person. What else was in his kit?
Well, he had a beautiful little flint dagger with an ash wood handle and a sheath woven from plant fibers. This was his everyday carry.
His EDC.
His ADC, exactly. His survival tool and his primary self-defense weapon. And he also had a small retouching tool, a piece of sharpened antler, specifically for resharpening the edge of that flint blade.
So this guy was self-sufficient. He was maintaining his own gear.
Completely. And then there was his quiver and arrows. This is what points to him being either a hunter or a warrior. Likely both. The distinction probably wasn't as clear-cut back then as it is for us. You hunted to eat, you fought to survive.
What was so special about the arrows?
Well, the quiver itself was made of animal hide, and it's what was inside that tells the story. It contained 2 finished arrows, tipped with flint heads and fletched with feathers,
Ready to fire.
and 12 unfinished arrow shafts, just the wood.
Oh, that adds such a layer of immediacy to it. It's like he had a to-do list. Item 1, finish fletching my arrows. And he never got to check it off.
Precisely. It really emphasizes the suddenness of his death. If he had known he was going into a life-or-death battle, you have to assume he would have finished making those arrows. He was caught unprepared or in the middle of a journey.
Okay, so he's armed. He's high status. What about his clothing? You can't survive up there without serious gear.
And his gear was incredible. He had a bearskin cap, leggings made of goat hide, a loincloth of sheepskin, a coat made from a patchwork of different animal skins. He was a walking ecosystem.
But let's talk about his feet. Because if you are hiking at 10,000 feet, the very first thing that's going to kill you is exposure. The ground is freezing. And he didn't have Timberlands.
No, but what he had was arguably better for that specific environment. It was a masterclass in composite engineering. His shoes are perhaps the most fascinating piece of technology he carried.
Okay, break it down for us. What is he actually wearing on his feet?
It's a complex multi-part system. The outer sole is made of tough, durable bearskin.
Why bear?
Because it's thick, oily, and naturally water-resistant. The fur would have faced inwards for warmth and the tough hide outwards for grip. It gives you incredible traction on rock and ice, almost like the Vibram sole of a modern boot.
Okay, that's smart.
Then the upper part of the shoe is made from softer deer hide, which is more flexible around the ankle, and it's all stitched together with animal sinew.
But just leather freezes, right? It offers almost no insulation on its own. If you just wear a leather moccasin on a glacier, you're going to lose your toes to frostbite.
100%. And this is where the genius comes in. He essentially built a thermos for his feet. Inside that leather shell, there was a netted sock made of lime tree bast. That's the stringy inner bark of the tree.
A net, like a fishing net.
Think of it more as a structural cage. And inside that cage, completely surrounding his foot, he had stuffed handfuls of dried grass.
Just grass.
Not just any grass. Researchers identified it as a specific type of sedge. Now, this is the brilliant part. If he had used wool or more fur on the inside, once it got wet from sweat or meltwater, it stays wet. It would freeze right against the skin.
You get frostbite in minutes.
Yeah, right. But the grass, the structure of the grass traps dead air, which is the best insulator we know of. It's the same principle behind fiberglass insulation or styrofoam. But the grass also wicks moisture away from the skin and holds it in the outer layer, away from his foot.
So he basically invented a breathable, waterproof, insulated boot using nothing but animal skin and weeds.
And get this. When modern survival experts and researchers recreated these shoes and hiked that same mountain in them,
What happened?
they found them to be warmer and more blister-resistant than many modern high-tech winter trekking boots.
That just blows my mind.
It was technology that was perfectly adapted to its environment. We think we're so smart with our synthetic fibers, and this guy figured it out with grass 5,300 years ago.
So we have a picture emerging of a man who is dressed for the weather, carrying high-status weapons, and has the absolute best gear that money or barter could buy at the time.
Yes. He was prepared. He was extremely capable. This wasn't some fool wandering into a storm by accident. This was a master of his environment.
So let's answer the big question. Who was Ötzi? We've talked about his gear, but what do we know about the man himself?
Well, first let's really contextualize his era, because it's hard to grasp. He lived roughly 3,300 years before Christ. That's 5,300 years ago.
Just to ground that for everyone listening,
Yeah.
that is profoundly old.
It is before the Great Pyramids of Giza, old. It is before the main construction of Stonehenge, old. When Ötzi was walking the Alps, the woolly mammoth was still hanging on in a few isolated places on Wrangel Island.
Wow.
Writing was just barely being invented in Sumeria, thousands of miles away. Europe was in this murky prehistoric transition period that we knew very, very little about until we found him.
And he wasn't just a brute, right? I think we all carry this caveman stereotype, grunting, dragging his knuckles.
Far from it. This discovery completely shattered that stereotype. Ötzi was a sophisticated modern human.
Right.
Biologically, genetically, he is identical to us. But culturally, he possessed knowledge that we are only just beginning to understand.
Let's talk about the medicine. I read that he was carrying what amounts to a first aid kit.
He was. It's one of the most incredible finds. He carried pieces of birch polypore fungus threaded onto leather strips. For a long time, we didn't know what this was for. But chemical analysis suggests it contains oils that are toxic to intestinal parasites and also acts as a natural broad-spectrum antibiotic.
Wait a minute, did he have parasites?
Oh, he did. His mummified intestines were examined, and the autopsy revealed he was infested with whipworm.
Ugh.
He would have been in chronic pain, probably had severe stomach issues like cramping and dysentery. But he wasn't just suffering through it, he was actively treating it. He had a pharmacy in his pouch.
That's incredible. And then there are the tattoos. This part is just wild to me. He had tattoos, but not like, mom on his bicep or a cool dragon on his back.
No, these weren't decorative in the modern sense at all. He had over 60 tattoos on his body, but they were mostly just simple sets of lines and crosses.
And they were made with charcoal dust, right?
Yes, fine charcoal dust rubbed into small incisions. But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. They weren't placed randomly. They were grouped around his joints, his lower back, his knees, his ankles.
Places where you'd feel chronic pain, especially if you were hiking all day, every day with a heavy pack.
Exactly. And when they did radiological scans of the body, X-rays and CT scans, they showed that he suffered from osteochondrosis and slight spondylosis, basically, significant wear and tear in his lumbar spine, and arthritis in his knees and ankles.
And tattoos are right on those spots.
The tattoos correspond almost perfectly to the traditional acupuncture points that are used to treat those specific ailments today.
So the tattoos were a form of therapy. Pain relief.
That is the leading theory, that they represent the earliest known form of primitive acupuncture or a related therapeutic treatment.
But that completely rewrites the history of medicine, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We usually think of acupuncture as an Asian invention that came much, much later.
It suggests that people in the European Alps understood the body's pain pathways, meridians, if you will, thousands of years earlier than we ever thought possible. It implies a sophisticated medical tradition passed down through generations. He was literally walking around with a map of his own pain management tattooed on his skin.
So let's build a profile of the man. He's about 45 years old, which was pretty elderly for that time.
Getting up there for sure.
He's in pain. He's got bad knees, a bad back. He's got a chronic stomach ache from worms. He's hiking up a 10,000-foot mountain pass. This man was tough as nails.
Unbelievably so.
But he didn't just freeze to death, did he?
No. And this is the ultimate twist in the story. For a full decade, from 1991 to 2001, the official narrative was tragic accident. The old man got caught in a sudden storm, was exhausted, lay down to sleep, and just never woke up.
Which fits the romantic image, man versus nature.
A very poetic but incorrect conclusion. Science got better. Our tools got more precise.
You know what happened in 2001?
In 2001, a radiologist in Bolzano, Italy, a Dr. Paul Gostner, was taking a new, higher-resolution look at the CT scans, and he saw something that everyone else had missed for 10 years.
A shadow.
A dense, anomalous object hidden deep in the left shoulder, lodged beneath the shoulder blade. It was a flint arrowhead.
Whoa. So he wasn't just cold, he was shot.
He was shot. From behind and from a distance. The arrow entered his back, missed his vital organs at first, but it severed the subclavian artery. That's a massive blood vessel that supplies blood to the arm.
And how fast does that kill you?
Minutes. It would have been a catastrophic internal bleed. He would have bled out into his own chest cavity. He would have lost consciousness very, very quickly from blood loss and shock.
He was ambushed.
It appears so. And suddenly the entire scene changes. The prone position, the outstretched arm, the scattered gear. This isn't a campsite where someone fell asleep. This is a crime scene.
But wait a second. If he was murdered, why leave the axe? You just told us the axe was a Ferrari. It was a hugely valuable status symbol. If I mug someone, I'm taking their Rolex.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The killer, or killers, didn't take the priceless copper axe. They didn't take the valuable U-bow. They didn't take his knife or his medicine, which strongly suggests the motive wasn't simple theft.
That was personal.
Or political. A rival chieftain, a clan dispute. Maybe he was an outcast being hunted down. We will probably never know the specific why, but the forensic evidence tells us a lot more about the how.
I heard they even found blood on his knife that wasn't his own.
They did. This came much later with advances in DNA analysis. They found traces of blood from 4 different individuals on his gear.
4 people.
4. One person's blood was on his flint knife, 2 other different people's blood was on one of his finished arrows, implying he may have shot it, retrieved it, and was preparing to use it again.
Hold on. He retrieved the arrow. That implies a much more extended firefight. He shoots someone, runs over, pulls the arrow out of the body, and gets ready to shoot someone else.
It paints a picture of a desperate running last stand, and the 4th person's blood was found on his coat.
So he was carrying someone, or was wounded himself.
It's possible he was carrying a wounded comrade on his back before he himself was killed. Or it could have been from a prior conflict. And there's more. He had a significant defensive wound on his right hand, a deep cut between his thumb and forefinger that was in the process of healing. It was maybe a day or 2 old.
So he had been in a knife fight before the arrow fight that ultimately killed him.
Exactly. This wasn't a random mugging. This was the culmination of an ongoing violent conflict. He was a man on the run. He was fleeing up into the mountains, probably thought he had escaped. He stopped in that basin, perhaps thinking he was safe, perhaps simply because he was wounded and couldn't go any further.
And then the arrow from the dark.
Most chilling of all, a man who was murdered. That line from the source really hits home once you know the full story. It changes him from an archaeological specimen into a human victim.
It really does. It completely bridges that gap of 5,300 years. We understand violence. We understand fear. We understand betrayal. Suddenly, he isn't some alien from the distant past. He's one of us.
And that's the real power of this discovery. It humanizes the Copper Age. It proves it wasn't just small groups of people sitting around banging rocks together. It was a complex society with hierarchy, advanced medicine, sophisticated technology, and yes, brutal interpersonal violence.
So let's pull back and look at the big picture. We have a dead man, a 5,000-year-old murder mystery, and a melting glacier. Why does Ötzi matter so much beyond just being a fantastically cool story?
I think you have to start with the fragility of it all, the sheer luck. Think about it. If Helmut and Erika Simon had taken the main trail instead of that gully,
we never find him. He eventually decomposes in the summer sun or gets ground up by the glacier as it moves, gone forever.
Or if the weather that year had been just 2 degrees colder, he stays buried. If that undertaker had been just a little more aggressive with his ice pick.
We destroy the evidence of the arrow wound or the tattoos or the axe. We'd have a mangled body and no context.
It's miracle after miracle that we have him at all, and in the condition we have him.
And because we do have him, we've had to rewrite the textbooks.
Completely. We now know that the European Copper Age was more advanced, more connected, and more violent than we ever dared to imagine. He has provided invaluable data points for dozens of fields: genetics, climate science, botany, forensics, medicine. He's a one-man encyclopedia of a lost world.
But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? As our climate continues to change, as the glaciers all over the world continue to retreat at an accelerating pace, what else is out there waiting?
And that is the truly provocative thought to leave everyone with. We are entering what some archaeologists are calling the golden age of ice archaeology. The mountains and the permafrost are losing their ice at a terrifying rate, and in doing so, they are giving up their dead.
Are we ready for the secrets that are waiting for us in the ice? Ötzi was just the first. Who knows who or what is next?
It's a sobering thought, really. We are gaining this incredible knowledge, but it's coming at the cost of the very environment that preserved it for us.
It's a trade-off. Knowledge for ice.
A trade-off we're being forced to make.
Well, that definitely gives us plenty to think about. Ötzi the Iceman. A hiker, a warrior, a patient, a victim, and now a global legend. Thanks for helping us unpack this incredible story.
It was a fascinating journey back in time.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, everyone.
And keep your eyes open. You never know what you might find if you take a shortcut.